Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Terry Clark. I'm the Arizona Literacy Director, and on behalf of Read on Arizona and Read on Phoenix, I'd like to welcome all of you to our first ever Early Literacy Summit. Our next speaker, we're very thrilled again to have him, is Barry Broome. He's the President and CEO of the Greater Phoenix Economic Council, one of the longest-standing regional public-private partnerships for economic development. He has more than 20 years of experience in community building and economic development and public policy design. His tenure at GPEC has led to the attraction of more than 170 companies to Greater Phoenix, creating more than 30,000 jobs and more than $7 billion in capital investment. But what you might not know is that Barry is also a strong advocate for reading. When I first met Barry, his first question to me was, what are we going to do about this literacy issue? And he explained that he didn't, when he was growing up, have access to many books, but he's made sure that his own kids are surrounded by books and understand the importance of reading every day. Barry gets this issue, certainly as a parent, but he also happens to get it from the business perspective. He understands the direct correlation between literacy skills and our region's economic development, and we're honored to have you with us here today. So please help me welcome Barry Broome.
I was joking because, you know, when you give talks, it's always disappointing when the person before you gives your talk. So I had to write different notes because I had most of that material up on this. So if I'm serious, scrambled handwritten notes, that's why I was like, doggone it. So yeah, so I've kind of had a little bit of a path of literacy. So I thought I'd give you just a little bit of the anecdotal stories why I'm so interested as an economic developer. My parents had 7th grade educations. So when I went to college, I was actually a very good student in high school, but it was a poor high school. So I had about a 3.7 GPA, and I got a 17 on the ACT. So I always laugh about this because I got recruited by Ohio State, and I was a wrestler in college. You couldn't tell. You probably thought it was basketball. And so my buddy in high school was the equivalent of Mr. Football in Ohio, and Ohio State didn't offer him a scholarship. So I actually thought I had enough leverage to tie him into the recruitment of Ohio State football. So if you know anything about wrestling, it makes $8 a year, and football makes about $50 million. So I actually had the audacity, because audacity is something I had at an early age. I went to the associate athletic director and said, hey, you know, you're just not recruiting my guy because we're from a small school, even though he was Mr. Football in Ohio. And I said, this is a bias Ohio State has against athletes. So I don't know why I would come here and wrestle when, you know, you guys won't even look at, you know, my high school football teammate when he was Mr. Football. I said, really? I said, yeah. Okay, well, we'll be right back. So they come in, they bring in an academic advisor. And he said, you want to know why I won't mention my friend's name? He wouldn't mind. But you want to know why we're not recruiting your friend, don't you? Yeah, because it's a bias against small schools in Ohio. Yeah, that's it. Well, you want the good news or the bad news, Barry? So I'll take it either way. He goes, well, I'll give you the good news. He said, you got a 26 on your ACT. I said, well, that's pretty good. He said, you got a 17 and your buddy got a 9. So that's why he wasn't getting recruited. So here was a kid who was also a pretty good student, got a 9 on his ACT. And the academic advisor for the athletic department of Ohio State said, in order to get a 9 on your ACT, that means you spelled your name right on it. And that was a really tough thing to hear. Hear that for a friend. So when I went to college, I went to a Jesuit university. So my mother was raised in a Jesuit orphanage in St. Louis. She spent about 5 years when she was a kid in an orphanage. So my mother thought the Jesuits were all that. I do too now. All my kids went to Jesuit schools. So by not going to Ohio State, I went to John Carroll University. So I took my entrance exams at John Carroll. John Carroll had a great wrestling program, which was probably why I was even allowed to take the entrance exams after a 17. But schools were a lot more forgiving then about those college boards than they are now. And so the priest brought me in, and they said, we got a sense your grades are good. We got a sense you haven't been pushed academically. And I would say, well, what's your sense on that? I said, well, there's 1,100 freshmen entering John Carroll University this year, and you're last in mathematics. Of which I said, well, good news. I wanted to go to law school then. English is kind of my bag. Yeah, you're fourth from last to that. And I was like, wow, that's sobering. And then I went out to freshman orientation with 1,100 kids thinking, who are the 3 guys I was better at in English, So Father Bickle was my advisor, and he pulled me in and he said, what's your favorite book to read? And I said, I've never read a book. That's the truth. So he said, all right. He said, I'm going to give you a list of books. I want you to go down to the library and pick one out and read it and come to me and talk about it. So I said, okay. So he gives me, oh, this is such a bad story. He gives me a list of 500 books. And I was down there an hour looking for the skinniest book. And I found Call of the Wild with Jack London. And my kids love this story because they all read Call of the Wild when they were like in 2nd grade. So I was in college. I read Call of the Wild. I sat down with Father Bickle. And he made me read a book a month for my 4 years in college, and once a month I would sit down, pick off that list, and sit down with Father Bickle and talk to him about whatever it was we read. And then over time, naturally, my writing skills got better. A lot of things got better, and I was able to graduate and do some pretty interesting work. So on my path to doing economic development work, those same Jesuits hunted me down when I was about 26 years old. And Cleveland had collapsed economically. And so the mayor was looking like Mayor Stanton would. Where's all the young people that are going to go into the inner city and help us work on challenges with kids? I had a corporate sales and marketing job. And so I got roped into, well, you don't have kids. You don't even own a home yet. You can quit a high-paying job and go work in the inner city. What's wrong with you? And, of course, if you hang around Jesuits long enough, you just do whatever they tell you. It wasn't like I had a choice. Okay, I'll quit. So I went to work in the inner city, and I don't know if you're familiar with the youth build concept, but I was one of the guys that ran one of the first 3 or 4 youth build concepts in the United States with Dorothy Stoneman and John Bell. So now I'm in this inner city initiative, and my job was to run a gang intervention program. I was going to do leadership development, GED training, and I was going to train kids on skills. And just like you have full circles in your life, I had this whole cadre of 19, 20, 21-year-old young men, predominantly African-American, overwhelmingly, all had a very similar profile. They were all dropped out of school by the time they were 9th grade, and by the time they were 17 or 18, they'd been to prison. They'd been to prison for a year or two. And then when they came out, of course, they started down that cycle. Very tough to get a job when you're a high school dropout. Very tough to get a job when you're a convicted felon. And they would be referred to me by the judges. And so one of the first things we would do is establish their literacy rate. And it was almost always around 3rd grade. So you can see the common theme. Here's a 19-year-old kid, already been to prison, been in a gang, already labeled a felon, and he really couldn't read. And everything came hard to that kid because he couldn't read. Everything. So I got reconnected to, my interest in literacy because, and I think this is really important that we have this conversation in Arizona about education because, one of the things I've learned about education is literacy is like the backbone of education. If education was a human body, literacy would be the backbone. And almost all of our conversations on education in Arizona skip right over the backbone. We like to talk about merit pay for teachers a lot. We like to talk that funding doesn't matter to education. Those are some of our favorite subject matters. But we don't like to talk a lot about literacy. And it became a really interesting story to me because what I learned to do with this program, as I would get these very complex manuals from the state of Ohio Department of Education on how to teach GEDs and all this stuff, I learned pretty quickly, if I could get that kid to a 10th grade reading level, I could get him a GED. And if I could get him a GED and teach him a precision tool or a construction trade and get him a CDL, which is a commercial driver's license, I could get him a job at a living wage with health care benefits. So we took this very complex issue, which was intervention in the inner city, black gangster disciples, Crips, Bloods, if you can imagine that. And I was dressed like this because I came out of the corporate world. Those guys would be like, man, where'd you come from? You know, say, hey, this suit, I couldn't even afford this suit. Towards the end of the program, I had holes in my elbows because, you're starved to death when you work in the inner city. My wife worked in the inner city with me, and we did this for about 6 or 7 years. But it was a fascinating experience that, if you could get these kids and gangs to read, then suddenly, their language got better, their competency got better, everything about their ability to transition in society got better. And there was something magic about getting that 10th grade level. If we got them to 10th grade, they just took off. They had more confidence. If you wanted to teach them something on a precision tool, you could actually give them a manual. Kid's got a 3rd grade reading level, and you're trying to train him for a precision tool trade and get him out of the ghetto. You give him a manual, he can't read it. You think that kid tells you he can't read that manual? He doesn't tell you that, does he? What's he do? Takes the manual and says, oh, this is BS. No one's going to give me a job. So then someone goes back and goes, that kid's just lazy, right? He's just lazy. He doesn't want to do anything with his life. You're wasting your time with him. Well, he's ashamed that he can't read, so he's not going to tell you that. And so I look at literacy really as almost an economic empowerment symbol for people too. And that's another reason why it's so fascinating to me. I think when people talk about economic development, we just had this announcement in the East Valley with Apple. And, one of the things that I think I have to always be careful as the president of GPEC is I frequently talk myself out of my job with my investors because people think of us primarily as people who bring industry here. And that's what we do. And, in the last 3 years, we've brought more companies to this market than any economic development organization in the United States. So we've attracted more companies than Dallas. Anything you've heard about Texas, you should be proud of that. You should be proud of that. We get, great leadership from Mayor Stanton. We have unprecedented cooperation with our communities. So we got the best mayors in America all working together. Not just Mayor Stanton, but we got Scott Smith in Mesa, who is president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We got Marie Lopez Rogers, who's president of the League of Cities. So the 2 primary organizations in the United States, we have a West Valley mayor and an East Valley mayor being the president, and we got a big city mayor that people in Washington, D.C., and the White House and the Brookings Institute and a lot of important thought leaders follow and take great interest in. To tell you how much Greg's achieved nationally, he was the only elected mayor in the United States to get invited to the World Economic Forum, and I was happy to go with him. So we have all this unprecedented success on the outside, and I just got off the phone today with Bloomberg about our job numbers being so good. How come 75% of the jobs in our recovery pay $19,000 a year? So what's going on if we're so good at attracting business, and yet we have such a systemic economic outcome that when you tally it all up, it just really doesn't look that good? And why aren't more people in our community willing to talk about that? Well, that's a different kind of literacy. That's a political courage literacy. So in my interview today, when we were talking about one of the interviews was on educational attainment. Everywhere in the United States where there are 2 factors, that metropolitan economy works. Everywhere in the United States where 35% of the people in the metro area have a bachelor's degree, and of which at least 13 to 14% of those degrees are in advanced industries, are fully recovered and solid economically. That includes California, where you have the worst tax and economic policy in the United States. It includes Boston, New York. It includes Denver. Wherever that 35% number gets hit, and wherever that advanced degree coincides, full employment, stable employment, high wealth, sustainable economies. So why aren't we sitting around with that kind of metric conversation? So when people see us attract more companies than any other place in the United States, hey, that's great, and we should be proud of that. But let's move the conversation to a higher level about what's going to change the future of our community. Because as this disparate performance comes up, pretty soon the attraction of those companies are going to slow down. And one of the toughest conversations we have right now with companies is education. So if you back into it, if you're just a simple economic developer whose favorite book is called The Wild, how do you get to that 35% number? Well, it goes back to all-day kindergarten, doesn't it? It does. Now, in addition to not having read a book, I'm ashamed to say I didn't go to kindergarten either. I mean, I don't know how I got this job. Maybe this is why we're so screwed up, right? Well, the guy running everything has never read a book and didn't go to kindergarten. But I didn't go to kindergarten. And, of course, when I came here, people were talking about all-day kindergarten, but guess what? I came from states with all-day kindergarten. So I didn't even understand why we were having such a big conversation about it. Like, what? We don't even have all-day? Yeah, well, do you think we should have all-day? I mean, it was like kind of asking somebody if they should have a glass of water in the desert. You know, like, I guess we should have all-day. Are we the only people that don't have it? I mean, I didn't even know. So when I immediately came into town, that was when all-day kindergarten was kind of moving through the legislature, and GPL did such a great job with it. But I was flabbergasted we didn't have it, and I didn't have any answer to give because I didn't even understand what it meant not to have that. But you know the mistake we made on all-day kindergarten is we let the anti-education political faction of our state, which is too big a number and too strong, call it babysitting. So, you know, I'd like to see us get back to having the literacy conversation, and this would be a suggestion. You know, when we talk about literacy, we talk about programs, but, you know, we need to make a literacy of our policy making so that people understand how important literacy is. Okay, so without literacy, you're not going to have STEM. So every industry is asking you about your STEM performance. That is a literacy objective. You know, without all-day kindergarten, you're not going to have literacy. You know, without that 35% bachelor degree attainment, you're not going to have a stable economy. Because what our business attraction efforts are doing is offsetting an increasingly plummeting economy that since 1991, 90% of the job growth in Arizona have been consumption, 9% advanced industries. And that is a talent issue and an educational attainment issue. And it's going to be lipstick we can't keep putting on this pig. So I wanted to thank you for having me. And I want to let you know that, and I meant that the economy, not the state. So I meant that from a data perspective. I want you to know that we're working very hard in our organization to drive jobs here, but we're also moving to work to help give support to the educational community on this conversation. The business community has to be the backbone for the educational community to have the clarity and clearance to have a more thoughtful conversation in our community. We can't ask educators to teach the classroom and fight the battles too. So I just wanted to let you know GPEC's here to fight the battle with you. So thanks for having me.